Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're going to recap this week in cannabis from March 8th to the 14th. Now, before we jump into this video, if you learned something or you enjoy it, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel, and I do appreciate it. And then, of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And you can go back and watch episodes 3 and 4 of Reality Check Cannabis in 2020 to learn about the top U.S. multi-state operators operating in legal states, and then the top Canadian LPs operating in Canada that can ship internationally for medical. And then you can watch episodes of This Week in Cannabis leading up until now, because a lot has changed, and the momentum is still behind us with positive fundamental changes. So the New York Times is happy to report, as I did cover on the midweek update, hoping that they would do this on Wednesday. Mexico set to legalize cannabis, becoming the world's market, as the bill was approved Wednesday night to legalize recreational cannabis. And basically putting the U.S. between two pot-selling countries. So, America, can you just legalize already so that we can start the North American cannabis boom already? Now, this comes more than 2 years after the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that the country's ban on recreational cannabis was unconstitutional, which is and then more than 3 years after the country legalized cannabis. So it will have to go back to lengthy discussions and possible revisions from individual lawmakers, but in its final form, widely expected to sail through the Senate and be signed with support by the president. Now, the thing is, though, this will take time, and although there may be companies that do supply the medical market in Mexico, I just haven't done the research, but I would just avoid looking into Mexico as an opportunity to make money anytime soon, because it's going to take, 8 to 12 months possibly for the infrastructure, systems, and all that. And, if anything, you have to prepare for delays, so it can take longer. But what this does is, as of Wednesday night, allows citizens of Mexico to smoke cannabis and permit a small number of growing plants at home, which is progress. Personal freedom, what we're looking for, right? Now, Ayer Wellness, the second MSO, reports their fourth quarter and full year fiscal results. Now, we're not expecting growth like we are expecting from the big four MSOs with Ayer Wellness. And as you can see, from Q3 2020 to Q4, it was only 5% change in growth. And from Q4 2019 to Q4 2020, we saw 48% increase. So much smaller growth, but I think a lot of companies, again, are gearing for expansion so that they can really start benefiting in 2021 and 2022. And what Ayer Wellness is really trying to point out here is, with Pro Pharma, they're doing a lot of transactions, they're buying a lot of companies, but what they're saying is, so in Massachusetts, we're going from 50,000 to 140,000. In New Jersey, we're going from 30,000 to 105,000. Excuse me. In Pennsylvania, we're going from this cultivation facility. So this is what they are expecting, and they do hope to be. That just seems like an insane amount of cannabis. But mind you, they're trying to prepare. And again, a lot of what they have been, like a lot of the transactions this year, will not be completed until in later 2021. So 5 dispensaries currently open, pending final approvals. 31 currently open for completing, pending OMMU approval. 7 are currently under construction. So they're expanding, and they're planning to do a lot. Fourth quarter operational revenue, or operational highlights. We've got Nevada results here, Massachusetts results, and Pennsylvania update. Now, again, I'm not invested in Ayer, so I do not necessarily know what they're doing, but I just wanted to jump over here and provide more of an update, because they do give guidance, and so if you are invested in Ayer, you're more likely to want to read through this. And they'd handed one out, but they made a correction, but they're providing outlook for 2022. So what they're saying here is, as 2021 is expected to be another transitional year of getting licenses ready, getting places open and expanding, they're not providing any outlook. But from what they did, and so again, if we were to look at, that's the interesting thing. Sorry, full year 2020, they're up to 155 million. So again, that is significant in comparison to even Canadian companies. But what they are aiming for in 2022 is targeted revenues of 725 million and adjusted EBITDA, nice profitability of 325 million of that. So this is where their plans are big. Their targets are, again, pending merger and acquisition transactions. So a lot of stuff that they've done in the last year, it will take at least another 6 months to a year to go through, but that is why they expect some big growth for 2022. So that's Ayer. Good to see them making some decent progress. Now, Ben Kovler crushes it. I'm just going to play this video. It's about 5 minutes, but if you have not watched it, I suggest you do, because it just gives you more confidence in that these CEOs of these companies focus on the data and what's actually happening on the ground to provide their insights, similar to what I try to do when I share this all with you, versus, these anchors that, they're just paid to ask these certain questions and try to get this information out there. But just watch to the end. So good.
let's talk about legalization.
And sorry, just to point out, I'm also going to go through one with Boris Jordan, who's the chairman of Curaleaf. So we're going to see 2 interviews from them. And then a 3rd interview with BNN reporters talking about what we could see potentially coming sooner than later with safe banking legislation. So a lot of videos, but the 3 in a row is just going to, I think, make you more confident that, yeah, this is just, it's coming. And if you're not already confident, this will.
A lot of talk about it this year. Is your point of view that legalization will come this year or at sometime in the future? Will it definitely come during the Biden administration in your mind?
We're not very focused on that. What we're focused on is the consumer across America is choosing cannabis for well-being in various reasons, right? Use cases, sleep, pain, social lubricant, stress, anxiety. And what's happening in the state level, and we'll get to the federal in a minute, but this is really a classic American story, right? States versus federal. And what's happening at the state level is governors and legislators across the country, and in particular, Governor Wolf, Governor Lamont, Governor Murphy, Governor Cuomo, are all banging the table for jobs and tax revenue through legal cannabis markets in the U.S. We believe the federal government, which I think is part of your question in legalization, because it is legal in Illinois, where I'm sitting today, but it's not federally legal. We think the federal government is a lagger. They don't move very fast. They're not a forward indicator, and that's okay. That's part of our system. Maybe the best one around, but that's what we've got.
So just to point out, it seems like they're well aware that the federal government is going to take a long time, so they have just not bothered about that. They're just working on the state level in legal states where they can, and as you mentioned, it's part of our plan. Not even a concern for them. That makes me so much more confident because when you see the numbers, it's just, this is happening, right?
We're very comfortable operating legally under state-regulated governments where the governor has signed, state legislators are on board, and actually we're producing massive amounts of jobs, massive amounts of tax revenue, and really massive amounts of well-being for the citizens in those states.
So you mentioned that people are choosing cannabis, but they're choosing it in different ways beyond just flower. I want to talk about your partnership with Gwyneth Paltrow Can. That's a THC and CBD infused sparkling beverage. It's a seltzer water, not a hard seltzer. But do you see it as a competition for a hard seltzer or for a beer, or is it simply just an alternative?
This is an alcohol substitute that's better for you with no hangover. We think customers and consumers across the country should experience social tonic. We think Can is an awesome brand that can speak to consumers. It can offer an alternative. And that's what this is about. America is about choice, and so we're bringing that. But to your questions about form factors, people are branching out away from customary flower. The best analogy I could give you is flower in a baggie that many of us may have seen when we were younger is similar to bathtub gin or moonshine. And that's moved to Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, Jose Cuervo. And weed in a baggie will become Can, will become Dog Walkers, is Bebo, is Rhythm. Those are our brands. This is a consumer product, and this is happening in America. Around the country, people are looking to America to what to do on cannabis, and they're following our brands. That's an unbelievably exciting, really privileged and honorable spot to be sitting in.
Privilege. I gotta say that. For you investors and myself, I feel privileged to know about this and to care enough and to know that it's happening. Right?
As we lead that. But consumers are branching away from smoking to experience cannabis for their own well-being in many, many forms.
Let me ask you about just seeing some of the packaging there that looked like candy.
This is the best part. I'm just gonna.
The idea of seltzers that are infused with an intoxicant. Lots of parents, including this one, who has a son who has fought drug addiction over the years, are concerned about the idea that we're bringing yet another intoxicant to market and justifying it in a variety of ways, just as you have. What is your position on how you are going to keep these intoxicants out of the hands of people under 21?
Yeah, great question and very real point. We think a couple things. We think education is key. We think government and regulation can only do so much, and that market forces will find. Demand finds the supply, and what we can do is offer safe product that's tested and known. So the cannabis market in the United States will be 21 and over, must have ID, like alcohol. Does it mean alcohol is perfect for high school kids? No. but it's really easier to get a bag of weed in an illegal market than it is beer if you're in high school. But all the product is child resistant, is tested, has ingredients and things like that. So that's how I would answer that. And the other key piece of education here is there's an opioid epidemic sweeping across the country, killing people because they get addicted to pharmaceuticals prescribed by their doctor for pain relief, post-surgery, other kinds of forms. Cannabis is an exit drug from those sorts of addictions, not an entry gateway drug as has been taught.
Oh boy, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. That doesn't feel right to me at all, Benjamin. I'm sorry.
Sometimes new facts are hard, and we think education is the key, and that's okay. But across the country, in states where there's legal cannabis, you're seeing less opioid deaths. There's a correlation in the data. We believe strongly in math and in data, and we think that data will tell a really interesting story.
Love to see the data.
We will be back for it.
Good.
And just to point out, I mean, I've shown you the data multiple times. I'd love to see the data. You can Google it, old man. You can Google. Harvard medical cannabis reduces opioids. You can look for it. But, just like this anchor, they don't choose to look for the information that they don't already know. They want it delivered. But it's not anyone's responsibility to deliver the facts to this guy. So it's just so funny that one is the puppet for the media. The other one is the CEO changing the status quo for the better and actually bringing a product to market that people want, right? And again, on the topic of parenting, I mean, hey, I'm not a parent, but I just imagine if you're honest with your kids and you try to educate them as opposed to lying to them without giving any logic or reasoning behind it, that's certainly going to make your kids turn to substance abuse as opposed to you being just open and communicating as a loving parent should. So, oh my gosh, it's just like, this is what we're trying to weed out, but how well did Ben cover that, right? Ben flipped that answer, new facts are hard, so well. So just wanted to give props because that was such a good interview and we need more like this. Now, as we move on to Boris, and again, just to mention that, look, I'll save this for after. Now we'll start with Boris.
So you think that maybe as soon as this year we could see U.S. cannabis companies free to list on major exchanges in the United States?
I think that we'll get legislation this year to that effect.
Okay.
And that probably means that several months after that legislation, as the exchanges come up with their own rules, that we'll be able to uplist. But pretty quickly after we get the legislation. So we're expecting it sometime in the second half of the year, maybe into the end of the year, and then probably you're looking at first quarter next year for uplistings.
It's complicated, but one of the big things here would be banking restrictions on cannabis companies. Would those need to be loosened?
Well, the Safe Banking Act, which we're discussing today, does all that. It primarily loosens banking restriction. It gives safe harbor language for investors to invest in the sector, and it also addresses uplisting of U.S. stocks as well as the 280E tax burden that's placed on cannabis companies at the moment, and changing that to a 5% excise tax, which is being discussed in Congress as we speak. So that would really change the economic dynamics, because companies south of the border, companies in the United States today pay an effective tax rate of 55% versus every other industry in the United States that pays 22, 23%.
So just imagine how much more profit these MSOs are going to keep on their balance sheets after this stuff changes. And just to point out as well, this is what he thinks is going to happen. We don't necessarily know, but just a reminder of how long these things take. They do take time, so patience is such a skill in investing.
Right. Is there political traction, though, in Washington? I mean, I haven't seen it listed as one of Mr. Biden's top priorities. There's a lot going on with the pandemic, etc.
No, it's not on his top priority, but it certainly is on Senator Schumer, Senator Booker, and Congressman Wyden. They're all working on this legislation, and so and Kamala Harris, the vice president, has come out very supportive of this. So we do expect that if this law comes out of Congress onto the president's table, he will sign it. And banking legislation is nowhere near as controversial in the United States as full legalization. Now, if we're talking about full legalization, I don't think we're going to see that until the second half of his term, 3 or 4 years from now. And
again, we don't know that this is true. He likely knows more than we do, but he's just saying what he thinks. And here, I'd want to say this now. I want legalization for humanity's sake, and I know you probably do too, and for the freedom of choice, just because why shouldn't we be allowed to have this, a safer alternative, right? But legislation for investors to make money, so through the SAFE or some variation with the SAFE, with the something Arbor clause, he'll mention it, that basically allows investors to invest without fear of federal prosecution. This is going to come well before legalization. So what he just said is that like SAFE and banking legislation is not nearly as controversial as legalization. Now, we know this, but this is the thing. Most consumers who are voting with their dollars and buying cannabis in the US do not understand that banking legislation and full legalization are two different things. And that with banking legalization, or banking legislation would make investors money, full-scale legalization will make investors money too. But the banking thing is real, and it's coming a lot sooner than full-scale legalization. So just wanted to point that out, that like the healthier that these companies can get over time and the longer legalization takes, I personally think the bigger the boom can get. And I have no idea, but I just want to point that out because just that's my reasoning with it. I'm prepared to be patient, prepared to wait, but just wanted to add that. So.
When and if the Democrats can cement their stronghold in the Senate at the midterm election, or even add to it, and then you could see full legalization. But at this point in time, banking is not nor near as controversial as the other laws. It'll be supported by both Democrats and Republicans.
That is huge news. I think this is the last thing I wanted to cover.
Will it make a big difference? I mean, American investors presumably would be more comfortable investing on one of their own exchanges.
Right.
Yeah, I think the exchanges is a secondary issue, to be honest. Big U.S. investors invest all over the world. They invest in Sri Lanka, Nigeria, all over Africa. The exchange itself is not the big issue, although obviously trading on one of the major exchanges would be better. I think the real issue is safe harbor language that says that they won't be prosecuted if they invest in cannabis companies. And the government has basically come out and said, we won't, but it's not on paper. And big investors won't do it unless there's actually some kind of legislation around that.
So just want to point out, that's why I think we've seen big investors come in and invest regardless, because maybe they don't care and they're a little bit more lenient. Maybe they got friends in government, but they just feel like they're not going to get prosecuted. Whereas other big investors, rightfully so, until it's written on paper, you can invest in cannabis without the federal government coming to freeze your assets. They're not going to do it. That just makes sense. And that's something I didn't consider until watching this interview and didn't realize. So
that's the real issue. I think it's much more important than the exchanges.
Interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess you never know what way the Justice Department or the FBI is going to jump in these things, and you'd rather have some kind of legal assurance you're clear.
Absolutely. And the Obama administration had the Cole memo, even though that wasn't law, that did give guidance to the AGs saying that they shouldn't prosecute local state legislation, but that didn't affect the federal issues. And so a lot of the big banks in the U.S., as you know, are federally regulated, and so they want to know that they can operate in this market and they have a law behind it, and that's perfectly understandable.
Absolutely understandable, especially when you've worked hard to earn money, or when you've earned a lot of money and you don't want to lose it. That's called preserving your wealth, right? So fair point. If you are invested in Curaleaf, I would recommend watching the rest of this because he just talks a little bit more about how they're making their money through all the sectors of the value chain. But this is a great interview. So again, is legalization required for these companies to flourish? No, it's icing on the cake. And it just, the longer that takes, the bigger the eventual boom can be. And now this is the last video. Well, no, there's another one, but this is the last one. Again, just kind of recapping what he spoke to Boris Jordan about.
Just got off the phone with the Curaleaf's executive chairman, Boris Jordan, earlier this morning. And he said that he believes that there's going to be some clauses in upcoming cannabis reform legislation that should be introduced to the U.S. Congress that will directly address that U.S. companies will soon be able to uplist their stock and their company stock onto major exchanges such as the NASDAQ, the NYSE, or even potentially the Toronto Stock Exchange. Now, this comes given the fact that, as you said earlier, a lot of these U.S. multi-state operators are listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Once we see this cannabis banking reform, Andy, the sky's the limit in terms of what institutional investors will be able to access and invest into these U.S. companies that are currently right now, Curaleaf included, trading at a very deep discount relative to their Canadian peers.
So that's big to cover, and this one came out on March 12th, whereas this one came out, I think this one's a bit older, maybe March 9th, I don't know, March 11th. So who knows if Boris learned new information through that, but he's just reiterating that Boris is confident there will be clauses that maybe cover the safe harbor language, cover the uplisting, all of that, and basically saying that once that happens, once safe banking happens, not even full-scale legalization, but once the banking legislation happens, sky's the limit for investors, and just recapping that the U.S. companies are more significantly undervalued. Now, showing you all of this, you're like, well, what about the people in charge? Well, this is what we're getting to. So the Senate just confirmed Merrick Garland to be the Attorney General of the U.S. And Merrick Garland was the one, he was the appointed Attorney General, and he was the one saying that the cannabis laws need reform, they're outdated, it enables racist policing. So for him to get confirmed, that's awesome, because when you're appointed, you have to eventually be confirmed, right? So I didn't realize that too, but that's great. And again, Chuck Schumer, the man, and as Boris said, it's not Biden's job to make this reform happen. It's Schumer, Booker, and Wyden. And on March 11th, he tweets again, we must finally end the federal prohibition on cannabis. And I think this coming after they did complete the COVID stimulus bill. So this is very promising that, yes, they can get back to work on what's next in line, and whether it, probably has to do related with Rona and vaccines and whatnot. It's they're working towards it. And again, to point out, when have you ever seen this from the most powerful person in Senate, in the U.S. government, tweeting their intention to end cannabis prohibition? Like, you don't see that. So I just wanted to point that out, that again, this is amazing. So just be patient. And this came out of nowhere. Chairman Nadler, so Jerry Nadler, that's from what I know, there was a hearing in the Controlled Substances Federal Policies Enforcement Wednesday, March 11th, and this came out of nowhere, which was awesome. The Congress, we need to continue our committee's work to take steps to right the wrong of the failed war on drugs. So it seems as if this week they're talking about these issues as Schumer tweets this, and then Jerry Nadler says this. But just long story short, to go through, yada yada, I long believe that the criminalization has been a mistake. Yes, thousands of individuals have been subjected. Yes, we know this. This is why I will be reintroducing the MORE Act to remove cannabis from the controlled substances and to provide restorative justice for communities that have been proportionally impacted. Now, there's no date when he says he's going to do this. There's nothing more than that. But the fact that this was said on Wednesday in the opening statement is just also very positive, because more people are realizing that, yes, this has to be done. This fixes and corrects a lot of past wrongs, and just, again, from more positions of power, having this said and put out there. And again, this is the MORE Act. This would be full-scale legalization. So again, we don't know when this is going to be, but it's just intention. The more we see that, the better. Now, Green Thumb, we're going to jump into MSOs. Green Thumb enters the California retail market, opening a store in Pasadena. Now, this is their 53rd store nationwide, their first one in California. So awesome for them to be able to scale out and expand there. But just to point out, California is the largest legal cannabis market in the world, with experts estimating the markets to generate between 6.9 to 8.1 billion by 2024. And so if the US brought in 17.5 billion, California is already bringing in a large portion of that. So in addition to California, Green Thumb is in Connecticut, Illinois, Florida, Maryland, Massachusetts, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So notice states with large populations or states that are planning to legalize soon. That's been sort of the game plan for these MSOs and what Ben Kovler was talking about. Now, 9th Harvest affiliated Pennsylvania dispensary opens in Whitehall. So awesome announcement out of Harvest Health and Recreation, as they are expanding into Pennsylvania. Now, this comes on the eve of their, or it might have been the day before, but they did announce their earnings as well. So we will hear from Harvest Health and Recreation after most of the MSOs on March 30th. And as a shareholder of them, I'm excited to see this. Now, in these earnings, we're only going to see sales from October, November, and December. We are not going to see the earnings for adult legalization in Arizona, which happened on January 21st. So we'll see those earnings in the summer, in June, which would cover January, February, and March, and I'm very excited to see those numbers. But anyways, we know when Harvest is going to announce. Now, this was just the last video to show you that it's just absolutely insane, but the good news is, to point out, is that we're seeing less and less of it. This is the minority. This used to be the majority for the last 70 years, but listen to this nonsense.
So this is a dangerous drug that will impact our kids. If you legalize marijuana, you're going to kill your kids. That's what the data shows from around the country.
No, that's false. He's a puppet for Big Pharma. And Big Pharma is saying, look, we're running out of populations that we can get addicted to our substances, so we're going to pay you to spew nonsense. Because it should be noted that teen cannabis has dropped significantly in Colorado after the state legalized. Colorado went from number 1 in the U.S. to number 7 amongst teens, according to federal data. And, it's just, this is nonsense. But folks, the best part is, I want to highlight this again, this is the minority. We're seeing this less and less. and again, insane. Even alcohol and tobacco were like, no, we can't fight reality. Like, let's just join in on this, and try to get a piece of it. But just this absolute nonsense from Sam, the smart approaches to marijuana. That's big pharma, a puppet for big pharma. But nonetheless, again, that's the minority, because the majority. 2021 sees Republican lawmakers take lead on cannabis legalization in more states. And if you want to read this will all be below all the links, but Florida is making effort, probably not this year but 2020. Georgia, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So this is the norm now. So just want to point out to anyone that still thinks this is the norm, it happens, but if you live in a state, if you live in Nebraska, I would consider moving, because this is just the first step towards brutal corruption and loss of rights and personal freedoms. But so again, this is awesome to reiterate that. Now, Virginia as well is considering speeding up their legal cannabis timeline, because again, if you're going to legalize it, but then only start pass the bill to legalize drug beginning in 2024, it's just lip service. You're literally doing something good. Without actually you're saying something good with any underlying action, so that people think, oh, well, they did something, well, we can revote them in. I would be weary of that. So I'm encouraging my colleagues, this comes from Senator Louise Lucas, encouraging my colleagues to join in and asking the governor to legalize cannabis on July 1st, 2021, because you can still arrest people. It did not do enough to address racial disparities in arrests and citations. If it's not legal until 2024, you can still arrest people and put them in jail for cannabis, which is just insane, of allowing the continued over-policing of color. So good on them. Hopefully they do change that. And top lawmakers are really encouraged by cannabis legalization talks with governor. Now, they're working on this over the weekend, but the issue has been between Cuomo and lawmakers, and apparently she's encouraged. Talks are really good and really fruitful. Never been this encouraged before. So again, we're not going to hold our breath, but we're just going to wait and hope that this does happen before the deadline of April 1 for New York. Now, a survey actually paid for by Curaleaf found that a majority of New York voters support accelerated rollout of legalized cannabis. 72% believe cannabis is safe and in many cases helps improve life and promoting wellness. 57% of New Yorkers prefer a legalization plan that utilizes existing medical program to more quickly provide access, jobs, and tax revenue and social equal opportunity. So just to point out, folks, the fundamentals, the numbers are there, or the markets. I want to point out that the numbers are there in the people, the markets, and the fundamentals, not in the nonsense that people on TV and the terrible mainstream media narrative is just spewing out stuff that's not true. We're seeing numbers, and the market's voting. Not with just their opinions, but their dollars. So again, we're all going in the right direction. So just want to reassure you to be patient. Now we're going to jump over to Canada, because a lot of updates did happen this past week. Now, Tilray received approval to expand and commercialize medical cannabis products in New Zealand. Now, Tilray, a global pioneer, announced that it received the necessary approvals from New Zealand's Ministry of Health and Medical Cannabis to launch Tilray medical products across country. Does that mean that they can launch yet and start making money? No, right? So this takes a long time as well. Hopefully they can get stuff there by second quarter of 2021, apparently. But again, this is good for Tilray and Aphria, which will merge and take advantage of this, at least getting a footprint in these international markets before other licensed producers or companies can. That is a huge advantage that they have. But apparently the rigorous approval process is a testament to the high standards that New Zealand holds, and that's why they choose Tilray. So, you can put that out there, make them sound good. And can it be, unfortunately, though, the opposite side of, what we're not seeing in the U.S., because these U.S. companies have the populations to make multiple companies successful and profitable over time. In Canada, besides Tilray and Aphria, we're kind of seeing headlines like this. Canopy Growth laying off 75. Plans to close Danish facility in latest cost-cutting move. So, again, when you aim to be so big, but then your investments don't pay off and you don't get a return on investments, it's just Canopy, Aurora have just been selling facilities, laying people off. Very unfortunate. And this just, being fortunate that I've been through this in 2018, I get to see this again and again. It's just not what you want to be invested in. Aurora Cannabis announces they are diluting again, raising another $1 billion during a 25-month period. So Aurora, over time, has just diluted, bought reverse split, diluted, reverse split. So again, it's just another example of aiming too big, not being actually able to pay off these big ambitions, and just having to dilute shareholder value. Very sad, very unfortunate, and just a sign of the bubble that we had in 2018 in the aftermath. HEXO puts out a release, but HEXO wins complete dismissal of U.S. federal shareholder class action. I mean, this is news, but hey, we're not getting sued, so invest in us. It's not great news, so, right? So it's just funny, like the difference that you see in what's happening. Just to point out that the U.S. in 2021 is not going to be a bubble situation. Once, like if full scale legalization does take a long time, even until 2022, 2023, like what sort of a green wave we could see when that happens, that could eventually be a bubble, just depending on how high it takes it. The ceiling is kind of endless, but just point out that, again, this is not necessarily news. It's just the caliber of Canadian companies versus American companies, hard to compete. American companies just do business better. And Organigram and British American Tobacco form product development collaboration, includes strategic investments from British American Tobacco for 19.9% equity interest. Now, what does this mean? Essentially, they raised money, Organigram diluted, but instead of, from a private investor, they did announce that it was from British American Tobacco. And what they plan to use this for is our strategic collaboration strengthens our ability to deliver innovative, differentiated products that appeal to adult consumers, and we expect it to be transformational for Organigram shareholders. Now, what kind of money is this going to make for British American Tobacco? I'm not sure, but this does just, again, strike me as the Cronos deal. Altria getting into Cronos for the research and development and future technology of cannabinoid vaporization, probably along the same lines, to strengthen Organigram's ability to compete, a lot of research and development, product pipeline development, so that they can expand internationally and compete long-term as well. So good news, though, S&P Dow Jones, which is the Canadian version of the S&P 500, will allow Organigram and Village Farms International to join an uplist. So this is exciting, but also just want to add, think about the day. It's going to take a long time, but the day that Curaleaf, Cresco Labs, Trulieve, and Green Thumb Industries can uplist to the S&P 500, I wonder how long that'll take as we sit here in 2021, but I just find that fascinating to think about. And again, I don't mean to harp on Canadian companies. I'm just trying to show you the facts that, the situation of Canadian companies now versus the situation of U.S. multi-state operators is very different. And so that also just comes with experience, but knowing when to get into certain markets and when not to, based on headlines that, don't actually produce revenue, or headlines that are actually showing real significant growth. Now, last few things just to end on. Curon becomes the first Colombian medical cannabis company to export live cannabis clones to Europe. I wanted to cover this just because this is a first. Never before has it been reported that plants were shipped from South America to Europe, which is awesome. So Curon has successfully exported its registered cannabis strains from Colombia to Europe. Now, just to point out, there is no figure in here of numbers on how many clones they sent, or if they were paid for these clones. They likely weren't paid for these clones. But just to point out that this is a first, and what we're seeing is cannabis shipped from Latin America to Europe. That's awesome. So it just means that, again, the narrative, the sentiment around cannabis is changing for the better. And again, by 2024, the European market is expected to grow to nearly 22 billion. So again, I think it's early to get into Europe, but mid-2021 to mid-2022 possibly. Again, I don't know, but that's when I would definitely start paying attention and looking into that market once we start seeing revenues, from considering Europe did 1.1 billion in 2020. If we can see that increase, hopefully double by 2021, then certainly worth looking into some of these companies. But again, I just think the growth that you're going to see in the U.S. is going to trump that. So last thing to point out, this is an article, Cannabis will be normalized before it's legalized. This is an interview with Merida Capital's Mitch Barachowitz. Now, I don't know who this man is, but I just wanted to point out that what he says does seem to line up with what I know, and they're just interesting. And again, reassuring that we are in the right spot, that the momentum is behind us, pushing us forward. And so some of the highlights that this writer learned from his interview with this man, Mitch, cannabis will be the first to market, or cannabis will be the first market to be normalized before it's legalized. And people don't fully appreciate how fast cannabis is being normalized. Now, I would say cannabis has been normalized quite a bit in the last decade, especially in the last 5 years. But just think about how much more quickly it's going to be normalized and accelerate in the next 3, 4, 5, right? The legal cannabis market is eating the illegal market, and we're seeing that in Canada. In fact, the more stores we open, we're at a 40%. 40% of cannabis bought in Canada is from legal sources, where 60% is still from the illegal. But when Canada legalized, 4% of cannabis was bought from legal sources versus 96% still from the illegal market. So due to safety, access, quality, and choice, legal cannabis is now growing faster than illegal cannabis. That's a fact. And again, the more stores you open, the faster this can happen. Investors need to pay attention to the importance of medical insurance and what will be deemed reimbursable and how the process will play out. I have no idea what he's talking about there, but that's something interesting to look into eventually. And again, I think this could possibly change when federal reform, when reform does happen. We don't necessarily know if, the existing systems are going to have a shakeup and have to really sort of move around what does get changed. But I think the discussions between cannabis industry and government is helping that be a smooth transition. But something to consider I didn't before. Market forecasters are underestimating just how big the cannabis market will be. This gets me very excited because I think I'm underestimating how big it's going to be, really, in terms of wellness. And when people really see the benefit of the wellness that it can bring them if they use it properly as a tool in moderation. And in the future, cannabinoids could be the biggest OTC drugs available and will be added to everything. Think Advil, think CBD together in a pill is just an example. And I agree with that too. And I think people that don't know how to approach cannabis, take 2 Advils every 4 hours. If whatever, you can't sleep or you have pain, you can consume cannabis every 4 hours. It's not something to be taken all the time, but similar to that. And I do see this being a massive thing where you can just buy CBD-based medicines over the counter too. And I've said this before, it's going to eat into Big Pharma's profits quite a bit. I think it will. So just pointing this out because these are all valid points that I do think are understated. Let me know, do you agree on these? Do you think there's more that he could have covered? Or if there's just anything that I have not mentioned that has not been spoken of, let me know in the descriptions, because again, we are rounding the home stretch, everyone, I think. And again, it's the best time to be a cannabis investor, to get in now as these earnings take off before legislation, and at least to buy and hold to the end of 2021 for a nice opportunity to lock in profits with all of these catalysts that we see. And for anyone that is in the US, I'm not, but if I was, I would be calling my local representative, because what you can do is choose your state, choose your senator, choose a class, and try to reach out to someone in your state and tell them, hey, I think the Safe Banking Act would benefit the state. I think it would benefit the people. It would benefit cannabis businesses legally operating in these states. It would benefit all these things. Basically, just, it seems like it's a lot of work and something that you don't want to do, but this stuff, small efforts by individuals over time are what matters. And I don't know how much this could help, but I just want to point this out here. If you are American, hey, maybe write a letter, send an email, or pick up the phone. Just try to call your local representative and mention this, because you never know what your efforts can bring. And so anyways, that is it for this week's episode, everyone. I know that was long, but I hope that video has brought you value and just reassure the position that, fundamentals and the market is what you want to pay attention to. And the market is speaking, they want cannabis, and the fundamentals are strong and only getting stronger. And those are the main things you want to pay attention to. So again, this is not advice, this is education, but you have lots of videos to go back on and watch. And again, we've come a long way, folks, and I'm excited to see this week, March 16th, we will have Green Thumb Industries report their earnings. So that's going to be very exciting. I will cover that on Wednesday. And so anyways, please let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this, leave a like, and subscribe if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great day, everybody.